Welcome to the world of science fiction stories, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe my channel. Enjoy the listening. Human farmer fed a hungry alien feline soldier abandoned to die by his kind, but days later ships. It was near sundown when Harland caught sight of the shape lying broken in the shadows beneath his Tamer's trees. The old farmer had seen strange things before. Meteor fragments burning through Salia's thick, glass-hued sky storms that carved trenches through the wheat. Once a pod from some forgotten war had crash-landed in the west fields and filled the air with a song so sad the birds refused to sing for a week. But nothing prepared him for the hulking forms speeding between the trees. Armor cracked, fur matted, striped and smoldering as though it had fallen out of some nightmare made of steel and ash. He approached slowly, shotgun loosened from his grip, but his instincts weren't screaming threat. They were whispering something else, something older. The creature, tiger-like in shape though far too large and far too otherworldly, breathed in ragged pulses, its chest wrapped in scorched combat plating, rose and fell with a kind of desperate rhythm. There were plasma burns down its side, claw marks too, like it had been torn at by its own kind, and its mouth hung open slightly, revealing ivory fangs dulled with blood. It should have terrified him. Instead, Harland felt his hand lower the gun. He muttered a curse under his breath, turned on his heel, and walked briskly back to the farmhouse. When he returned, he carried a metal bowl filled with water and 3 ration cakes soaked in stock. He slid the offerings across the dirt just out of the creature's reach, then backed up and waited. The creature's ear twitched, one golden eye cracked open, faintly glowing in the fatting light. Its gaze locked onto the food, then onto Harland. Neither of them moved for a long time. Then, slow and agonizing, the beast dragged its body forward with a grunt that sounded like thunder and mourning wrapped in one. It collapsed at the bowl, lapped at the water with desperate gulps, then chewed down the rations in silence. When it finished, it looked up at Harland once more, not in thanks but not in hunger either. Harland gave a slow nod. "Well," he muttered, "I guess you're not going to die today." The tiger's head lowered to the dirt, a low growl escaping from somewhere deep in its chest, not hostile, but something between pain and peace. As night fell around them and the stars blinked awake above the trees, Harland turned back toward the house. The next morning he told himself he'd have a proper look at it. Maybe fix what could be fixed, maybe bury what couldn't. Either way, he had company now, and the fields would never be quiet again. The tiger soldier didn't speak for 2 days. It barely moved at all aside from dragging itself a few feet into the shade when the suns climbed too high. Harland kept bringing water, broth, and the occasional strip of meat cured from last winter's hunt. He never got too close, but he watched and he waited. On the 3rd day, the creature finally raised its head when he approached. It had cleaned some of the blood from its face with one massive paw. There were deep scars beneath the fur, not fresh, not old battle scars, but like a tapestry that had been torn and restitched too many times. The eyes were clearer now, sharp, piercing, intelligent. "Figured you'd be up soon," Harland said. "I wasn't going to haul you to town, not with what's coming down from orbit these days." The tiger blinked slowly, then shifted its weight and sat back on its hunches, a fraying leg wrapped in what remained of its armor. It opened its mouth and spoke. Its voice was deep, layered, almost metallic, filtered through some kind of translator embedded in the black collar at its throat. "You are T.H. Carlin," Harland raised an eyebrow. "That's what the title says, Noms Harland, Harland Trove." A pause, then, "Tron, is that your name or your rank?" "Yes," Harland almost laughed. "Fair enough." The tiger's gaze scanned the farm beyond the trees, the rusting silos, the blinking wind units, the fields of golden cane rippling in the breeze. "This world is not strategic," it said slowly, as if the idea offended it. "Nope," Harland replied. "That's why I like it." Another pause, then the tiger asked, "Why did you feed me?" Carlin leaned back against a fence post, arms crossed. "Didn't seem like the right time to ask what side you're on. I could have killed you, you still could." They locked eyes, but there was no malice in Tron's stare now, just confusion and something softer. Harland recognized it. He had seen it in animals before, right after you rescue one from a trap. It didn't expect to survive. The big ones don't always know how to feel gratitude, but they remember who opened the jaws. Tyon lowered its head slightly. "I was a soldier of the Kelly Legion, left behind during retreat." Retreat from what? From failure. Harland nodded slowly. Well, he said, you're not the first thing I've pulled out of the dirt around here, but you might be the first one that talks back. Conan's shoulders shifted, half a shrug, half a stretch. I owe a debt, I don't keep ledgers. Just don't eat my chickens and we'll call it even. Another blink, another pause. Then for the first time Tron looked amused. A flicker, barely there, but Harland saw it and he smiled, because something strange was taking root in the middle of his broken, dusty farmland, and it was more alive than anything he had planted in years. By the end of the week, Tron was walking. It wasn't graceful, not yet. His gait was stiff, punctuated by an occasional wince and the grinding snap of his half-crushed armor, but his strides carried strength and something more than that, purpose, perhaps, or defiance. The kind of movement that didn't just say, I lived, but shouted, I was meant to. Harland watched from the porch, sipping bitter tea from a cracked ceramic mug. The suns had just passed their highest point, burning long shadows into the dirt. The tiger soldier stood near the irrigation canal, staring at his reflection in the water, head tilted just slightly, like he was trying to remember the shape of the thing looking back. You going to drink or just glare into submission? Carlin called. Curran didn't respond right away. Then, in his usual low, calculated tone, I was many things before this, you still are. Harlan said, walking down the steps, just got to figure out which of them are worth keeping. The tiger looked over at him, eyes a little less guarded. And you, what were you before this? Harlan chuckled. Oh, I was many things too, mostly loud, angry, and stupid. Got myself shot for all three more than once. Farming's simpler, you dig, you plant, you wait. If you're lucky, you harvest. Tron nodded slowly. Simple is not weak. No, Harlan agreed, simple's hard. Actually, it takes patience, and patience ain't easy. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was something stronger, mutual recognition. Carlin could feel it settling between them like a bridge stretching quietly across the gulf. Species, between wars, between all the ruin they both crawled through to get here. That night, they shared stew under a sky riddled with stars. Tyon sat without armor for the first time, wrapped in a heavy cloth Harland had stitched together from old freight tarps. His stripes shimmered in the firelight like a galaxy pressed against muscle and scar. You're kind, Tyon said as they ate. Are you smaller than I expected, but you endure. Harland poked at the stew. Well, we're stubborn, that counts for a lot. Tun's jaw shifted in emotion. That might have been a smirk, and somewhere deep in Harland's bones, the quiet part of him that had long since gone dormant stirred, because something was coming. He could feel it in the air, like the pause before a storm, and somehow it had everything to do with the tiger sitting across from him. The storm arrived at dawn, but it wasn't rain, it was shadow. Carlin had just stepped out onto the porch, mug in hand, when the sky cracked wide open with the sudden thunder of propulsion. The wind scattered dust across the fields, the goats panicked, and overhead, descending like a hunter come home, was a sleek obsidian-black ship with crimson markings along its underbelly. It didn't fire, it didn't land, not yet. It hovered, silent and imposing. Watching, Curran was already moving, armor back on, posture taut with something between rage and resignation. He stood in the middle of the yard, claws flexed into the soil, tail low. That's Chelly design, he growled. An Alpha-class troop carrier. Harlan stepped beside him, shielding his eyes with one hand. Friends of yours? No, not anymore. The ship finally descended, landing gear hissing as it pressed into the red dirt beside the silo. The air shimmered around it, thick with heat. The ramp lowered and three figures stepped out. They were like Curran, but not taller, broader still, wrapped in ceremonial plating, faces hidden behind war masks shaped like fangs. Their movements were coordinated, almost ritualistic. The one in front bore a banner etched into his shoulder, a circle cleaved by a single claw. Tron, don't move, said Verak. My former battle commander. The figure removed his mask. Beneath it was a face carved from age and fury. The stripes faded, but the eyes still burned gold. Tan Verak, he said, his voice ringing with disappointment. You were presumed dead. You hoped I was. You were injured. You slowed the unit. You refused the final order. I refused to slaughter civilians. The pause was sharp. Harlan tensed, fingers twitching toward the scatter gun leaning against the porch rail. Verak looked past Curran to the farmhouse, his gaze lingering. You've been living among humans, he said. I've been surviving, Tron replied. This one gave me food, shelter, no expectations. Varek's lip curled. You've gone soft. No, Curran said, stepping forward. I've gone free. The tension snapped like a wire pulled too tight. One of the soldiers reached for a weapon. Harland raised the shotgun. I wouldn't. The standoff was brief, brutal, silent. Then Varek raised a clawed hand, halting his men. Lucky, he said to Curran. The Ha wants you alive for now, but don't mistake this mercy will return, and next time we bring fire. Fire! With that, he turned and vanished into the ship. The engines flared, and they were gone, dust settled, and the farm went quiet again. Khan exhaled long and slow. Harland looked at him. You were right, they ain't your friends. No, Tron murmured, they're worse. They're still who I used to be. Harland placed a hand on the tiger's shoulder carefully. Then you're doing just fine being something else. And somewhere beneath their feet, the earth remembered what war tasted like. But this time it would answer with roots and claws for days. After the ship's departure, the sky remained heavy, as if the atmosphere itself was still bracing for fire. Harland worked with his hands more than usual, tending to the cracked irrigation lines and reinforcing the coop fencing, but his mind remained fixed on the shadow that had descended from the sky. Tron's presence around the farm changed subtly, too. He rose earlier, ate less, spoke even less than usual. He began facing the perimeter, leaving enormous, deliberate paw prints in the soil which the wind failed to erase. Harland didn't press him at first. Everyone had their way of preparing for a storm, and Tyon was no exception. But on the fourth morning, when Harland came around the barn and saw the tiger standing in the middle of the wheat field, unmoving for what felt like an hour, he knew it was time to speak. They're coming back, aren't they? Tyon asked, turning his head slowly, his body framed by golden stalks that reached his shoulders. His stripes shimmered under the early light, an all-slick contrast against the tall grain. There was no fear in his eyes, only inevitability. Yes, he said, soon. Tron's tail swayed once. Varek is many things, patience is not one of them. He'll return when he believes I've become weak enough to drag back to the maw and chains. He won't expect resistance. Carlin adjusted the brim of his hat. Then we better disappoint him. Karen blinked. It might have been confusion, it might have been something closer to respect. You would stand against a war fleet, he said. With a shotgun and a dying field, I've done worse with less. Harland replied that afternoon. They began preparing. The farm wasn't built for war, but it was built to endure. The old irrigation tunnels became trenches. The collapsed silo was reforged into a barricade. Harland brought out a crate of scavenged parts from past harvest runs, drones with busted propellers, mining charges, an old turret that hadn't fired in years, and let Khan go to work. And what a strange sight it was. Tyon hunched over a bench, claws moving with surgical grace as he rewired a missile guidance core into a proximity alarm. Harland hammering sheet metal to the outer fence, while a 7-foot tiger in armor murmured about voltage thresholds. They didn't speak of what would come. They didn't speculate. They built on the second night, while they shared roasted root veg stew by lantern light. Do you miss it? Harland asked. Tyon paused mid-bite. Miss what, the life you left the war? The tiger's jaws moved slowly, thoughtfully. No, he said, but I remember it. It taught me to fight, it didn't teach me how to live. Harland looked up at the stars. Funny thing about farms, you stop fighting them, they teach you both. Tron's voice was quieter then. It's strange, in my culture, when a warrior finds rest, it's considered death, a kind of spiritual burial. But here, rest grows things. Harland smiled. So maybe you're not dying, maybe you're blooming. In the silence that followed, for the first time, Tron let out a sound that wasn't a growl. A low, warm rumble in his chest, a laugh. The attack came 2 nights later. It started with lights on the ridge, distant, deliberate, like the stars themselves had descended into marching formation. Then came the roar of engines, louder this time, vibrating through the farmhouse walls like an earthquake birthed from the sky. Harland stood on the roof, rifle in hand, eyes locked on the descending shapes. No, not 1, not 2, but 5 ships, their hulls black and etched with glowing red scars, not scouts, not threats, an army. Down below, Tyon stalked through the wheat like a ghost with claws. He moved with precision, silently checking the mines they had buried beneath the fence. syncing the jury-rigged turrets to the motion sensors. His voice came over the comm they had built out of an old tractor radio. Varrak didn't come to take me back, he came to make an example. Harlan didn't reply right away. He chambered his shotgun, eyes still watching the first ship land. Well, he finally said, I reckon it's our turn to teach the lesson. The first wave came with scorched boots and shock rifles, Carely enforcers in mirrored masks. Their movements were rigid, flawless, inhuman. They advanced through the barley with formation tight and intentions clear until the field exploded. The proximity mines lit the night in a firestorm, tearing holes in the first two ranks, sending others scrambling. The turrets whirled to life, spitting tracer rounds and spinning arcs. The air burned with smoke and shattered dirt, and from the flames emerged Tyon, not hiding, not retreating, but charging. He tore through the Carelian soldiers like a thunderclap with teeth. His claws were faster than their guns. His fury was not blind. It was focused, tactical. He didn't just fight, he dismantled. Every step forward was a statement. You do not leave me behind again. Harlan provided cover from the porch. His shots, timed with precision only decades of solitude could sharpen. He didn't shout, he didn't flinch. He simply fought beside the only friend he'd made in years. At the height of the chaos, Varrak emerged from the central ship, armored like a war god, spear crackling with ionic current. He bellowed Pan's name like a curse and leapt into the fray. Their clash was not elegant. It was thunder crashing against fire, flesh against steel, honor against guilt. Tron's shoulders split open under the first strike, but he didn't falter. He drove his claws into Varrak's chest, pushing the warlord back toward the burning field. Sparks flew, blood, silver and thick, splashed across the dirt, and then the tide turned. Tyon caught Varrak's weapon mid-swing and snapped it in half. With a snarl, he stepped into the commander's reach and whispered something no one heard. Varrak fell, not dead, but defeated. The remaining soldiers, leaderless and scorched, broke ranks and retreated, their ships lifting away in panic, and then the farm was quiet again. Ash fell like snow, wheat fields burned in soft orange light. Harlan climbed down from the roof, his legs shook, his fingers twitched, but his heart still beat. You good, Harlan called. The tiger looked at him, nodded, and then collapsed. Harlan sprinted, because no soldier wins a war without scars and no friend should fall alone. The days that followed blurred into a long haze of blood, smoke, and sweat. Harlan had never worked so fast in his life. He hauled Curran's massive frame back to the barn with help from a sled he built for transporting harvest crates. The tiger was unconscious but alive, chest rising with each breath like the slow, steady pulse of a volcano. The wound in his shoulder was deep, ripped through armor and muscle, but it had missed the artery barely. Harlan used every medak, every sterilized rag, every ancient remedy the locals still whispered about in the market square when machines failed and prayer ran dry. He didn't sleep for 2 nights, barely ate, and sat by the tiger's side with a shotgun in one hand and a flask in the other, as if daring the universe to try again. On the 3rd night, Tron stirred. His eyes fluttered open, glowing dully under the low lantern light. Harlan leaned over. You're back, the tiger grunted. I won damn right you did, Harlan said, his voice cracking with fatigue and pride. Took that warlord down like he owed you rent. Curran tried to sit. He failed, his breath hitching sharply. Harlan pressed a hand against his chest. Easy, you're not done bleeding, and I'm not done patching. We'll get there. Curran stared at him for a long while, and then he said something unexpected. Where I come from, warriors die alone. It is tradition, the purity, the end of the path. Well, Harlan replied, your people sound like they need better traditions. You did not let me die. No, Harlan, he said, I didn't. Khan closed his eyes again. Then I am yours now. Don't say that it is not ownership. Khan murmured, it is bond. Harlan sat back in the chair, watching the tiger drift into sleep again. Outside, the sun rose over black fields and battered fencing, but something had taken root, deeper than any seed, something stronger than war, something finally worth saving. Tron healed faster than Harlan expected, not because of the medicine, but because of purpose. Within a week, he was walking again, slow but steady. Within 2, he was working beside Harlan, reforging the scorched fencing, resetting the traps, rebuilding the broken gate with quiet, careful movements. They said little during the labor. They didn't need to. Their silence had grown thick with understanding. The wheat wouldn't grow again this season. Too much of it had burned, But the barley had held, and the western orchard, somehow untouched by the battle, was beginning to bloom. Life, it seemed, had a stubborn streak, and Curran had begun to smile. It wasn't wide, it wasn't human, but it was real. A subtle twitch of his lips, a lowering of his shoulders when Harland cursed at the AI drone for tipping over a bin of fertilizer again. There was softness in his eyes when the goats nipped at his tail and ran. "You ever think about what comes next?" Harland asked one night as they sat on the porch watching the twin moons rise. Tyon turned to him. "Next? Yeah, after all this, after the fires, after the war, after the last fight, you have to win." Tyon didn't answer right away. His claws tapped against the porchwood. He looked out over the fields where the dirt had been blackened but not broken. "I don't know what comes next," he said, "but I know I want to see it tear." Harland sipped his tea. "That's a good start." And then, as if summoned by the very thought, the sky changed again. Lights, 3 of them descending, smaller this time, slower, not warships, but transports. Harland stood, Tron rose beside him, tense but not hostile. The ships landed gently in the southern field. From them stepped figures, tiger-like but not armored, not armed, older, worn by life, not war, children too, a family. No banners, no threats. The first among them, a matron with stripes of silver and dark red, approached Curran and knelt. "We heard the warlord fell here," she said, "that you challenged him." Curran nodded. "He came to burn what could not be controlled, and you stopped him. I had help." He turned, and the matron looked at Harland. She bowed her head. "Then this is sacred land." Harland blinked. "It's just a farm." "No," she said, "it is more." Behind her, the others gathered. They began unloading supplies, tools, seeds, crates of alloy and grain, not weapons, but gifts. Tyon stepped beside Harland and whispered, "They followed the story. They want a place to live, a place to begin again." Harland stared at them, then at the land, then at the sky. He exhaled. "Well," he said, "hope they know how to mend fence." And just like that, the farm was no longer just his. It had become something else. A refuge, a home, a beginning. It had been a long time since laughter echoed across Harland's fields. Now it came in waves. Low rumbles from the older tiger folk helping to lift a broken solar array into place. Light chuffing chuckles from children racing through the orchard with wooden sticks pretending to be warriors. And warm, rolling tones from Tyon as he gave instructions on crop rotation like he'd been farming for years. The land was changing, not just in color as green began to bloom again where fire had scorched, but in spirit. The burned ground had been turned. Replanted trees that once stood alone now cast shade over tents and newly built dwellings. What had once been a solitary farm had become a village of sorts, a living mosaic of stripes and skin, of claws and calloused hands working side by side. Harland stood on the roof of his barn, hammer in hand, surveying the changes below. A group of younger tiger folk were learning how to install insulation panels, laughing as they fumbled and shouted curses in 2 different languages. Tron stood among them, guiding them with patience that was somehow both gentle and commanding. His shoulder, once torn and scarred, now bore a fresh mark painted, not branded, a streak of wheat gold over his stripes, not a military symbol but a mark of kinship. Harland never asked them to stay, but with every ship that touched down came more survivors, more of the exiled, the forgotten, the ones who'd run from war with nothing left but stories and broken armor. And with every arrival the farm grew, not just in size but in soul. At night they lit fires, not for warmth but for memory. Around the flames they shared tales of lost battles, betrayed oaths, the weight of claw and steel, and the new rhythms of farming life. Carlin never said much during those circles, but he was always there. Sometimes whittling, sometimes listening, sometimes sipping tea while Khan spoke of the human who fed a soldier in the dirt and changed everything. One night, after the others had retired to their shelters and the fire burned low, Curran approached Harland with something wrapped in cloth. He unrolled it slowly. A blade, not a weapon of war, but something new, forged from melted pieces of his broken armor and the debris of the fallen warships, the hilt wrapped in fibers from Harland's own grain sacks. "I won't carry this as a weapon," Khan said. "It's ceremonial, it belongs here." Harland looked at it. It shimmered in the firelight, simple, balanced, heavy with meaning, beautiful. "But why give it to me?" Harland asked. Khan's voice was steady. "Because without you I would have died in silence, and this place would still be empty." Harlan took the blade, holding it like one might hold a memory. Then I guess we're both lucky. He set it beside the porch that night, resting it where anyone could see it, not as a threat, but as a promise. Peace, he decided, wasn't the absence of fire. It was what you built after the embers cooled. Spring on Soloria was like nowhere else. The skis turned pale green in the mornings, washing everything below in a soft glow. Crops bloomed fast, greedy for the sun, and the air carried a music of rustling leaves and distant thunder, the kind that never quite became a storm. Harland rose early, as always, but this morning was different. Tyon was waiting by the barn with a strange look on his face, solemn but not grim. "We have a request," he said. "Who's we?" Harland asked, sipping his coffee. Tron simply gestured behind him. The tiger folk had gathered in the main field, all of them young, old, scarred, hopeful, standing in a wide circle, silent and waiting. A banner waved in the breeze, a stalk of wheat crossed with a claw mark. "What's going on?" Curran stepped closer. "You gave us land, you gave us time, you gave us back our names when the war took everything else." He paused, then knelt. "We ask that you accept ours, that you stand among us not just as a friend, but as kin." Harlan stood frozen for a long moment. The wind pulled at his coat. His coffee had long gone cold. "I'm just a farmer," he muttered. "You were," Tron said. "Now you are more." They brought forward a cloak not made of armor, but of woven cloth dyed with soil, bark, and blood root. It shimmered with the tones of the field. They draped it over his shoulders. A young tigress approached with a carved band of wood and iron fitted to a human wrist. She slipped it on his arm. The moment was silent, then someone began to chant, a rhythm low and rising, like the beginning of harvest, like the heartbeat of new life. Harlan didn't cry, but he did smile because he understood. Now the land hadn't just grown crops. It had grown something wilder, a future built by a tiger and a man in a sea of scorched soil, forged not by blood but by mercy. And it would live as long as they stood as kin, as family, as the first roots of peace in a world that had forgotten what peace could grow.